Hello everybody, Justin here with Fat Robot. Today we are going to look at the append, prepend, append2, prepend2, wrap all, wrap inner, all these different jQuery methods that deal with inserting things into other things, or wrapping things around other things. So basically similar functions of all these. And we'll try to look at things, first of all, just to see how they would work when used more or less as expected. And then we're going to look at some other things that kind of give us some pretty crazy behavior. But in doing so, I think it also helps to see exactly how those things are working. So if you look at what I have set up here, I've kind of color-coded these and given them labels that should illustrate exactly kind of how everything's nested here. So everything is nested in this first level div. You can kind of think of that as the body for this whole thing, even though technically this gray area is the body. But for all intents and purposes, we'll just say that this first level is the body. It encompasses everything else here. And then in that first level of descendants of the body, or of our first level div, we have an h1, and it's titled first child of first level. We have another h1, this second child of first level, and then we have another containing div, and this is our second level div, third child of first level. And I know these names start to get confusing, but they're all there just so you can kind of keep the hierarchy in mind. But really, if you look at this thing visually, it's pretty clear exactly how this hierarchy is built, right? All these things are kind of wrapped in this green here. Those are all immediate descendants of it. And then these things that are wrapped in the orange are descendants of this other div. So within this second level div, which is the third child of the first level, we have another h1 element. It's h1 number 3, because it is the third h1 in total for the whole experiment. And this is the first child of the second level. Now we have two different h2s below that. So we have h2 number 1. It's the first h2 of the whole project. h2 number 2. So second child of second level, third child of second level. Okay. So now that we kind of seen our starting structure, let's start with a couple of these jQuery methods. I'll try to keep as much of this up on the screen as I can, but I also want to be able to see the code a little bit. So the first thing we're going to look at is the append method. And again, some of this we're going to go through you might totally be familiar with, and it's just the exact expected behavior that you would know. But if you stick through it till a little more towards the end, then we'll get into some of the quirks. So it might be worth sticking around, and you might learn something that you didn't know in the process, even about the more basic behavior of these things. So the first thing we'll look at appending a HTML string to all of our h1 tags. And so basically we're just putting a brand new element into the h1 tags. With these methods, you can take elements that already exist on the page and move them around, or you can bring in brand new elements. And in our case, we're going to do that by, and it's a little tough to see while this is commented out, and also, here, let me move this over so you can get a full line there. This is this HTML string. So it's exactly what would create that element if you were to write it in your HTML document. That will just create a brand new element. So let's uncomment this out. And you can see there it shows up in a nice blue color. And all these say append. These are all elements that have been appended. These elements are P-level elements. So you can see every H1 tag popped right in there, kind of exactly what we would expect, right? I'm going to leave that up for a second, and let's go ahead and run our prepend method. Now, prepend and append are essentially just the kind of opposite of each other. Append puts an element at the very end of a containing element, and prepend puts it at the beginning. So any other content that's in there will kind of, it will go to either side of that. So for example, on our append, this text here was the first bit of content in this h1 element. When we put append on, it drops it down below that. So now I'm going to leave that append on, and I'm going to uncomment this prepend. And there you can see in our beautiful lawn green, all these prepended elements. So same thing, it just, before all the content that is already within this h1, which is this whole purple area, it just pops it to the very top of that. So again, kind of totally what we would expect to happen there. It's pretty simple when you're using brand new elements. Let's take those off, and then let's look at what happens when we append an existing element. And so what I'm doing here is I'm selecting all of the h1 tags in our document, and I'm saying append, and then in the append argument area, I'm actually running another jQuery function, right? So our $, parentheses, h2, that's a jQuery function that is selecting all of the h2 tags in the page. And that's what's kind of cool about these. You can throw a jQuery function in there, which will in turn spit out a jQuery object that contains all of those things. There's a lot of other things that we can use in these argument areas, and we'll get to those. But this is where things will get a little bit quirkier, because we are now taking elements from the page and appending them to different elements. So things are going to shift around. So we uncomment that. Ah, look at that. So every single one of these h1 elements now has both of the h2 elements inside of it, and the h2 elements that used to be at the bottom are no longer there. And so what happened is this append method went through and it plucked out the h2 methods, or the h2 elements that used to be down here. It just pops those out of the normal document flow, and then it takes those and it cycles through each h1 element and pops the object that was returned from this this jQuery method that selected all the h2 elements. And so that object that's returned contains both elements. So it's going to pop both of them in here, pop both of them in here, pop both of them in here. And I believe, but don't quote me on this, this is something I should look up. I'll make a note at the end of the video. I believe it is actually like a reference to each one of these, basically. So it's not popping out a brand new object for each one. Each one, I believe, gets a reference to that object, but I could be 100% wrong there. So I'll note it at the end of the video. But so that's kind of cool. Then you can see it's actually starting to move some elements around. One other thing let's look at with these really quickly. Take this prepend that we did before. I'm going to put those back in. And when I prepend these p tags in here with the word prepend, I also give them, the class prepended. Now, what happens when we then go prepend everything with the class prepended to our h1 tags. This is kind of the fun stuff where you get to try to break things or see what kind of crazy behavior it has. So again, we prepended all these p tags that have the class prepended to the h1 tags. Now, what if we go through after that and prepend everything with the class prepended to the h1 tags? Do that. Whoa. Okay, there's 3 of them for each. Pretty crazy, right? So what's actually happening there? You might look at this and go, well, it's just supposed to add another, prepended or something with a class prepended to each one. So why doesn't it just like show up as 2? Or why doesn't nothing happen? It just shows up as 1. Well, what's actually happening here is when this prepend method is basically getting the things with the class of prepended, remember that it will pop existing things out of the normal document flow. And so it goes through and it gets 1, 2, 3, pops all those out of there, and then as a group puts each one into each h1 element. So it's popping all those out. Now there's 3 of them together. It pops 3 of them into the first h1, 3 of them into the second h1, 3 of them into the third h1. So kind of cool. It's, crazy to see how that breaks down. So let's uncomment these, and I should say recomment these, and then let's move on to appended to and prepended to. And what appended to and prepended to are basically kind of the inverse of append and prepend, where instead of selecting the elements that will have the thing appended to them or prepended to them in the initial kind of selector area here. Again, let me drag this out so these get into lines. It's basically the reverse. So what we have here on this appended to is the exact inverse on what we have here in append up at the top. So we have, in this one, it's selecting all h1 elements and it's saying append this thing to them. So put this inside of each one of these. With appended to, it is just the opposite of that. So it is saying take each one of these things and append that to every h1 in here. Basically does the exact same thing, just inverse. I guess there's probably a good kind of use case, or like I can't think of a good example of like why you would necessarily need both those, but it probably just makes it easier to think about things in certain situations. But basically it can be used exactly the same, just swapped around. So just to show that, we'll go ahead and do that. And now we have appended to, which, although a different color, you'll notice did exactly the same thing as our append method. We just had to put that HTML string in the kind of first part of this whole statement. Same thing with our prepended to. Yep, puts those at the top. And yes. So what do I want to do now? I'm going to uncomment these really quickly. I'm going to put back on this one that has it prepends that HTML string with the p tag class prepended. And now we're going to look at a little quirkier behavior. This is going to select all H1s and say append all H1s to things with the class prepended. Well, now that's kind of crazy, right? Because everything with the class prepended right now is inside the H1 tags. Excuse me. So what happens when we uncomment that? Oh, everything just disappeared. Basically, it made a weird rift in the space-time continuum. You'd think this basically sucks those into themselves, and they just completely collapse. Because I'll uncomment this again. We can look at this. Basically, what we're trying to do is take this parent element and stick it inside the child element. And that's about the point where this thing goes, I have no idea what's happening, and just completely collapses these things. I'm sure, the guys on the jQuery team could give you a little bit better explanation of exactly what's happening there. But essentially, it will collapse those elements. So again, take that off, just gone completely. Kind of interesting. So now let's go down to wrap. So we get back, this is our default